Right, today on cricket.com, we highlight the story of Azeem Rafiq, the Yorkshire all-rounder who first made allegations of racism and bullying against Yorkshire back in August 2020. And it was on Monday that his testimony was heard at a parliamentary hearing. And we have James Buttler from the Cricket Badgers podcast to, of course, join us right now and shed more light on this matter. James, thanks for your time. I'll bring you on right now. Before we hear from you, I generally want to play out a clip from Azeem earlier on Monday.
There was comments such as, "You lot sit over there near the toilets," elephant washers, the word he was used constantly, and there just seems to be an acceptance in the institution from the leaders, and no one ever stamped it out. It's not banter. Racism is not banter. I'm a massive believer everything happens for a reason. And like I said, hopefully in 5 years' time, we're going to see a big change. And I can look back at it that I did something that is far bigger than any runs I got or any wickets I got. But yeah, it's horrible. It hurts.
Right, now that was of course Azeem Rafiq in his hearing on Monday. Let's get straight into James. How was the hearing, and has the hearing been received?
It's been massively covered in the UK. I've been speaking to Azeem since August 2020 when he came on my podcast, and we tried to get some traction with that story, passed it to George DeBell at ESPN Cricket Info. And ever since then, it's really been the story to get Azeem heard. And it's been a long journey to actually get any traction at all with that story before anybody got interested. George then ran the piece about the P word being banter in the Yorkshire investigation. And all of a sudden, the story went bonkers. And everybody was talking about it in the House of Commons. It was back page, front page news. And obviously the select committee hearing yesterday was the culmination of Azeem's journey, really. I think it was the chance for him to get it off his chest with parliamentary privilege, the opportunity to name people if he wished and not have any comeback legally, and just the opposition, the opportunity to actually, you can tell I've done a lot of interviews, can't you? The opportunity to actually have his say and people listen to him, because that's not been the case for some time. There's been a lot of people suddenly got interested in this story over the last 2 weeks, and that's been fantastic. But for a long time, I think he felt that he was speaking to himself. And finally, cricket's woken up and listened.
Indeed, it has. I mean, it makes you think about certain things. Now, there have been some high-profile names, named by Azeem, who, of course, apologized since then as well. But according to you, where do you think the entire institutional racism all start?
Well, I worked at the club as well. I knew Azeem from when I worked at the club, and then I've worked in the media since. And I can honestly say that when I was at the club, I never heard the P word once. Never heard the N word once. Never heard anything that was overtly racist. There were a few things that made me feel uncomfortable, but obviously, I'm a white man in a white organisation. The kind of term institutional racism is to protect the likes of me, I guess, isn't it? And to keep Azeem at bay. And Azeem, obviously, as you saw yesterday in the testimony, had a number of issues that he wanted to raise. As you mentioned, a number of people. I think Azeem and I have spoken a lot over the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks, where he's been very adamant that he wanted to not make this about personalities, not make this about a witch hunt and have heads on sticks at the gates of Headingley, but to make this about the organisation and the culture of that organisation, with a view to hopefully making it better. Hopefully yesterday was Azeem handing Yorkshire a golden ticket that they can now, their reputation is never going to get as low as this, you'd hope. And it's an opportunity now for them to go from a very poor start yesterday to actually show the world that Yorkshire is a terrific county. I mean, I've lived here for a long time, so has Azeem. It's got some beautiful parts in it, some wonderful people here. But obviously the club over certainly the last 3 years since Azeem reported racism, and then in his time at the club, has let him down, and it's let the county down, and it's shown that it's not a representation of the entire county of Yorkshire, which is a multicultural county of rich diversity, and it needs to be better than that.
Yeah, it makes you think because you mentioned it right there. You're a Yorkshire man and a supporter, of course. Do you see this as an end point or a point of rebuilding the club, for example? I mean, how do you view it all being a man from Headingley and thereabouts?
I described it this morning as the end of a start of a beginning. The battle that Azeem's fought himself personally, and then, I've tried to help him. George DeBell's tried to help him since August of last year. It's been a long one. It's been one that he's had to fight largely on his own. It's been one that he's had to fight without any sign of the Yorkshire County Cricket Club listening to him, or indeed the wider world listening to him. And I think that's been quite a scary, lonely place for somebody who came into this. He was released from Yorkshire in August 2020, shortly after he'd complained about racism. Not long after he'd had a stillborn child, which is obviously an incredibly painful experience for anybody. And that still hurts him now. And you saw in the testimony yesterday, as soon as he gets anywhere near that subject, he starts to break down. It's an incredible, painful experience for him to have gone through, and his wife, of course, as well. And, this is taken a long time to get to this stage. And I think this was closure in a way for Azeem in the select committee. But we've had many talks about this. This is Azeem's club as well as my club. And it's a club that he's very proud to have been capped by. He's captained that club. And he is very proud of that and the stats that he has. And he, obviously wishes that he'd had a longer career there, I think. And you heard yesterday that he felt his career had been cut short by racism. But he's always viewed this part of the process as being just the start. This is kind of getting to the starting line where people are actually listening. This is the start of the club being able to change. This is the start of accountability, and it's the start of not just Yorkshire cricket, but cricket in general, of sitting up and actually taking inclusivity, any form of bigotry properly seriously, and dealing with it properly, and involving everybody in that process, and ultimately making Headingley Cricket Grounds a place where no matter who you are, where you come from, what you look like, what your sexuality is, what your religion is, you can sit in the stands and just think about enjoying cricket and nothing else.
Yeah, I was just coming to you being with Rafiq for the last 15 to 18 months. It's been a roller coaster of emotions. Can you just paint us a picture of how it's kind of unfolded behind the scenes?
Azeem came to me, or I came to Azeem. He'd done a piece in Wisden, and knowing Azeem, I tried to get him on the podcast before actually, and I dropped him a text message, I think, and said, "Do you want to come on the podcast now? I've seen your piece in Wisden," which was it mentioned racism in passing almost, rather than actually as the main part of it, and it was about his roller coaster ride towards the end of his cricket life, and as I mentioned, the stillborn baby tragedy and that kind of stuff. So I'd picked up on that, and I got him on. We talked about his career, we talked about all kinds of things, but we talked about racism, and I tried to drag a little bit more out of him on that podcast. And when we finished recording, I kept speaking to him, and you find often that when you finish pressing record, people are a little bit more eloquent and carry on speaking. And Azeem did that. I kept in touch with him. And my initial thoughts was, there's just something wrong here. This is a club that at least has questions to answer. They've not dealt with this right. They've ignored his complaints of racism. They've ignored his complaints of bullying. And regardless of whether the club thought he was right or wrong, they should have taken notes. They should have investigated. They should have spoken to people, and they should have acted accordingly. They did none of that. And they treated him with a distinct lack of respect. And I just felt that was wrong. And it needed to be, some questions needed to be answered. Contacted George. He ran a piece in Cricket Info as well, and that got more traction. And we started getting the club to sit up. But behind the scenes, it's been basically, I felt with Azeem, there was a number of things. As a journalist and broadcaster, there was the story. As a former Yorkshire employee and a Yorkshire fan, there was the club connection, and it was my club that was letting him down. As a human being, there was a person I was talking to that was broken and fragile and vulnerable, who had threatened suicide, who had had the stillborn child, who had experienced a horrible little passage in his life, which he was just finding himself strong enough to talk about. And I just felt, from all of those angles, I needed to stay in touch with him and kind of help him through this, because I felt strongly about it. I'd interviewed Michael Carberry on my podcast just 2 or 3 months before that, where he said racism was rife in cricket. The George Floyd stuff in America, the race issues was very much in my mind, and I'm quite a political beastie, and it mattered to me. And just hearing Azeem's story just kind of made me want to help him. You don't have to speak to Azeem for very long to believe what he's saying. And I just, we kept in touch. We talked about it. There were days where he was really down. I remember a day where he sent me a message saying, I just want to run away from life. And when you get a message like that from somebody who has contemplated suicide before, it kind of makes you think, oh, blimey, I better give him a ring and see if he's okay. So there was an element of kind of care for somebody that was a little bit vulnerable as well. And when I was at the club, Azeem was there, but I didn't really do anything more than with any other player. With him, he wasn't a kind of best mate. We didn't go home for tea together or anything like that. But I think over the last 18 months, he's become quite a close friend of mine. And I really respect him from what he's done. I've seen the vulnerability there. I've seen the dark days when he's found it very hard to carry on. I've seen the fighting days when he's fancied the scrap of, he's a battler, and he's not kind of taken a backward step in this. He's not let Yorkshire grind him down, and they've tried to. But he's a fighter. He's stubborn. He said yesterday he's got a bit of Karachi and a bit of Barnsley in him. And that basically, for anybody that knows those two places, I think it suggests that he's got a background of being a stubborn person. He's a fighter. He doesn't give in. And he hasn't done. And fair play to him. And I'm watching him, going through that journey with him, trying to advise him at times and trying to help him. And then seeing him sitting in that select committee hearing yesterday with the world watching him. And I can only imagine what it's like to sit there in front of the TV cameras and radio people, and obviously the MPs, and the pressure that's there, and the I guess the nerves that you must feel walking into that room. And to watch him basically get through the first couple of minutes where he was a little bit nervous and his voice was a bit shaky, but to grow and to just blossom and storm it basically for almost 2 hours. I had tears in my eyes at times. Often, a lot of the stories that he told me, in fact, most of the stories that he told in the select committee, I'd heard before more than once. But seeing them condensed into just under 2 hours, 18 months condensed into just under 2 hours in his testimony, was quite an emotional experience. And to see that kind of play out in front of me. And then obviously after that, there was Roger Hutton came on, the former chairman of Yorkshire. And then there was the ECB came on, 4 of them came on after that as well. And I think Azeem won the day. If you're doing it on points in a boxing fashion, I think Azeem had the knockout. I think Roger Hutton, I felt a little bit sorry for Roger because he's somebody that wasn't at the club for very long and didn't have a huge amount. He struck me as somebody that didn't have too many bullets in his gun when he started in that job. Tried his hardest, but couldn't actually make any difference. And then the ECB, I think they had a shocker. The ECB, the England and Wales Cricket Board, looked like a bunch of 6-year-olds doing a school play that hadn't been rehearsed. They were all over the place, and the select committee gave them a little bit of a hard time. But the journey from the start of this, when I kind of reconnected with Azeem on the podcast, to yesterday, It's been a long one. I mean, if I'm a bit exhausted and tired by the last 18 months, and if I am, I can only imagine where Azeem is. It's taken a toll on him, and it's taken a toll on his family. And I've got a huge amount of respect for what he's done.
Yeah, some interesting points that you mentioned there. I mean, it comes back to one of your interviews that you mentioned with Michael Carvery. He echoed a similar viewpoint. Now, in the bigger picture, what do you make of the structure of English cricket? Because does it lack inclusivity? Where does it lack inclusivity, in fact?
I think my opinion is that Yorkshire County Cricket Club is institutionally racist. You need to be careful about how you interpret that term. Because that doesn't mean that everybody inside that club is racist. When I worked there and I walked around, as I say, I didn't hear people I'd never heard the word, the P word when I was at Yorkshire. So it doesn't mean that people are dancing around with kind of Ku Klux Klan masks on and setting things on fire. But it does mean that I think the bones of that organisation over a long period of time, and this, Yorkshire and probably English cricket, probably since time immemorial, have had white people in charge. It's a class game where it tends to be middle and upper class people that play it. A lot of them are from public schools. There's the colonial background, of course, with the with Britain around the world. A lot of most of the nations that play cricket are either current or former colonies of the UK. Who were under British rule when cricket was introduced into those countries. So there's a history there, and I also think because of that history, people have just got used to acting and talking in the same way, and that's seeped on through the years. When there's been elements of racism at cricket grounds, and let's be honest, it's not just cricket that's got racism in it. The whole world's got racism in it, but we're cricket people, and we're looking at cricket. And this is our chance to make a difference in the small part of the world that we deal with. And so it's only to be expected that you're going to get incidents of racism in a cricket crowd. And it's the way a club deals with that. And from what I gather at Yorkshire and during my time at Yorkshire and beyond, the club have had instances and they have never dealt with it. They have. I've heard a lot about other counties now mentioning they've got a zero tolerance for racism. It's all right saying stuff like that, and it's all right ticking the boxes in your equalities brochure, and it's all right, going through the motions. But you've got to mean these things. You've got to actually believe that this is the right way forward. The culture of that organisation has got to believe that everybody deserves the same opportunity, that everybody deserves the same respect, and everybody is part of the cricket family in your club and beyond. And I don't think, although individuals have probably said it and meant it, and although it's probably it's probably not even done maliciously at times, and that's not an excuse for it. Cricket is there are not enough people that stand up in dressing rooms and say, you shouldn't be saying that, mate, or why have you done that to him, or please don't say that anymore, or don't use that word. There's not enough people that do that, and it takes some. It's not an easy thing to do that, because I've been in situations where it's easier to walk away from do that, because I've been in situations where it's easier to walk away from situations than stand there and actually look people in the eyes and take them on. And that's what life's kind of like that. You have so many things going on at times that you can understand why people shirk the battle, but we can't do that anymore. And if you hear something in a dressing room, or if you hear something in the crowd, you've got to basically say, mate, that's just not right. Don't say that. And I think the culture that's where the culture of Yorkshire County Cricket Club needs to change. It needs to have everybody that works there. It needs to have everybody that's a steward there. It needs to have everybody that impacts on the club on the same message, heading in the same direction, to a club that's absolutely as close to 100% inclusive as you can possibly get. and it shouldn't stop until it gets there. It's not about taking the club back up to levels of acceptability from the kind of canyon of despair and negative publicity that's dug for itself. It's about taking the club back to, excellent. Probably for the first time, taking it to excellent, and actually, having people in Yorkshire genuinely proud of the club. Because at the moment, I think a lot of people are very embarrassed in Yorkshire about what that club represents. A lot of the South Asian population of Yorkshire, who were possibly, I know, were mistrustful of the club before, after everything that's come out over the last few weeks, are thinking, I'm never going to go near there ever in my lifetime. So the club has got a huge amount to do. It's got to build massive bridges. It's got to make people trusted again. And it's got to get everybody to kind of buy into that, so that it actually has a positive future. And I'm really hopeful that, in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, however long it takes, we're able to look back on, this period, the last 18 months, as being a period where Azeem stood tall. Azeem basically stood up for what he believed in. He stood up for himself, and he made a difference. And I said yesterday that I think Azeem's contribution to English cricket, not just Yorkshire cricket, but English cricket, might ultimately be viewed as being far more important than anybody that scored 12,000 runs in test matches, 100 caps or 400 test match wickets. Because players come and go. You have your 10-year window or whatever it's going to be, your 20-year window where you're a professional cricketer and you play the game and you excite people and hopefully entertain. But then you become past former players and you disappear off into the black and white history books. Whereas Azeem has the real potential with what he's done over the last few months and years to actually be somebody that's remembered at the club, who was a defining moment where the club actually moved into 2021 and beyond and actually treated this issue seriously.
Indeed, a final one from me, James. So, is this a catalyst in the grander scheme of things? I mean, it's been a reality check, all right. Where do they go from here?
Well, I think the ECB's under fire after their performance at the select committee. I've seen calls today for Tom Harrison to go because, A, people don't think that he's got a handle on this, and B, a lot of people suggest that the ECB is not fit for purpose and isn't doing its job in terms of diversity and inclusivity. I think the heartening thing is that since the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter and all of the, I think people have actually started to think about their role in society a little bit more. You've still got the idiots who basically crop up on Twitter and say stupid stuff, offensive stuff. But I think more and more people are prepared to actually tweet that's not on, and actually stick up for people who are being racist, and that's the way it has to be. It's not good enough just to be quiet and to just almost be complicit. You've got to be, I think, actively anti-racist these days, and otherwise, what's going to change? But I think, the ECB's under fire. The game's got to take it seriously. There's players from other clubs coming out, and Azeem's opened the door. I think his hard journey to that door and having to really push it open has let a few other people through it almost. I was going to say free of charge, but certainly free of the turmoil of the battle of getting to that door. I don't think any victim can be described as being free of charge because they've suffered. But so the game's got to basically listen. If the game's got two choices: it either listens and acts and is better and creates a better game, or it falls apart, doesn't it? Because if it does nothing or it doesn't do enough, we're in serious trouble. So the game has to listen to. People. The game's got to respond. The game has got to not just say it's listening, but actually properly listen to people and make people's voices heard, and actually be a better game and a better game for everybody. And that applies to, I think it's easy for people in the UK at the moment to say this is a Yorkshire problem, and it is far from a Yorkshire problem. I've spoken to people from around the country who have had issues at other clubs too. I'm sure it's issues in other countries as well. But obviously, it's hit the fan in Yorkshire. Yorkshire have dealt with it atrociously. And I think ultimately Yorkshire's suffering now, reputational harm that they're suffering now could ultimately be a very, very good thing for the game of cricket, because it's got to provoke change. It's got to provoke people taking this issue seriously and actually listening to people, like I say, because ultimately, whatever the colour of your skin, you want, in life, you want the same thing. You want to have a happy life. You want to be loved. You want to love people. You want to be successful. And in terms of cricket, you want to play the best you can. You want to enjoy the game when you watch it. And you want to, if you work in the media, get paid a few quid to do it. We're all the same. It's just we look a bit different, and that's the only difference, isn't it? And cricket's got to understand that. And part, I think, of life is understanding that everybody has something different to offer. And that is other white people to me. It's other people of colour to me. The fact that other people have different religions or different cultures or different beliefs and how they might tackle things is interesting to me. Other people find it, it's different, so I'm going to steer clear, I'm going to criticise them, I'm going to be scared of them. We've got to move away from that, and we've got to be just one human race, effectively, and try and get better as a society, and certainly get better as cricket people.
Absolutely, I can't agree more with you. And on that note, thank you, James Buttler, for your time. And Guys, give them a follow. We'll leave the link in the description below. But it's been a thoroughly riveting chat and an eye-opening one, if I may add.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for your time.
The pleasure is all mine. And, guys, it makes you think about this really deeper, because sport brings people together. And hopefully, like James said, it could be a watershed moment if it ever was. We'll bring you all the latest cricket.com. So check it out. Until then, it's a goodbye from me. Thanks for watching and listening in.